Joining us now, NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale, Ashley Parker, senior national political correspondent at The Washington Post. She is an MSNBC political analyst, and Hans Nichols, political reporter at Axios. So, Gabe, the president has told his critics, watch me. And now all eyes are going to be on this press conference he's holding this afternoon. What's the mood in the White House today?
Hi there, Jose. Good morning. Well, White House officials are not looking at this as a singularly high-stakes moment, but they're framing it as a part of a series of engagements over the next couple of days with the media, with voters. Tomorrow he's heading to Battleground, Michigan. On Monday, as you mentioned, he's sitting down with our colleague Lester Holt, and then he heads out west to Las Vegas next week to speak at several conferences. So this is all what they see as getting him out there in front of voters, in front of the public, to show that he can do the job. And of course, this all comes amid the backdrop, Jose, of the NATO summit, which is underway here in D.C. You see the president right there last night speaking in front of world leaders here at the White House. They really see this news conference as a way to frame it as a contrast between President Biden and his opponent, former President Trump. But of course, all eyes in Washington and really many across the country will be watching to see how President Biden does, considering there are so many doubts, especially on Capitol Hill, about his candidacy going forward, Jose.
Yeah, I mean, Ali, let's talk about those doubts on Capitol Hill. These public appearances by the president seem to not have much impact on some Democrats at the House and in the Senate. What's the last 24 hours been like on Capitol Hill?
Well, Jose, I actually just took a brisk walk down this hallway with one of the doubters, the only person in the Senate Democratic ranks to actually say that he thinks Biden should step down as the party's nominee. That's Vermont Senator Peter Welch, who we caught up with as he was leaving this Judiciary Committee hearing. And he was very brief in his words, trying to rely instead on the statement that he put out last night, wherein he said he's spoken to constituents and he's heard their concerns. And for that reason, it's his opinion that Biden should no longer be the nominee of this party. He echoed those comments to me when I asked him if at the end of all of this, Biden remains the nominee, as he seems at this point inclined to stay. Doesn't that hurt the party overall to have come out and said he's not strong enough to go up against Trump in November? Welch instead said, I'm just saying my opinion. I'm just relaying the concerns of constituents. But certainly I've heard from other Democratic lawmakers, both in the Senate and in the House, who say they've heard from plenty of concerned constituents, as well as those constituents who want them to remain steadfast in support of the president as the nominee of the party. And that's really the tension point that we're seeing for lawmakers right now. I do think that yesterday, when former Speaker Nancy Pelosi went on our air and sort of gave an opening to have Biden make a different decision than the decision that he's already made to remain the nominee, that was certainly something that perked a lot of senators' ears up and a lot of House members' ears up. She's someone who's a thought leader in the party and widely seen as someone who could actually be persuasive to Biden if leaders wanted to make a case to him that stepping down is the only option. Of course, the fact that this was a week where NATO and world leaders were in town is certainly something that I've heard from lawmakers. Those who are concerned and might want to voice their opinion didn't want to necessarily do so while Biden was meeting with world leaders and while all eyes of the world were on Washington. But that NATO summit ends today. A lot of eyes are going to be on the president's presser, but we might hear from lawmakers before then. I've had a few lawmakers say to me that there will be more people coming forward to say he should step down.
And Hans, meanwhile, you have new reporting about what Chuck Schumer is signaling to donors behind closed doors?
Yeah, Jose, that's right. Chuck Schumer's privately telling donors and indicating to them that he's open to someone not named Joe Biden being atop the ticket. Now, I want to be very careful on what our reporting is indicating and how far it goes. And it's the easier way to do this is to say what Chuck Schumer isn't saying. And we don't have Chuck Schumer actively entertaining or actively pressing for Joe Biden to be kicked off the ticket. That would be an entirely different story and one that would frankly be more significant. What we do have is that he's open to the idea. And he's listening. And Chuck Schumer, along with a lot of other Senate Democrats, have been listening to their constituents. They've been listening to their donors, and they've been reading polls. And they're going to have to make a difficult decision here in the next 24, 48 hours, maybe even longer, to kind of get at this central challenge, which Ali sort of hinted at. And that is that if you call for the president to step down, it makes it exceedingly difficult to campaign on the same ticket that you and him are going to be on in November. And that's the calculus, and that's what everyone's talking about privately. The question is, to what extent do those private conversations come into the public domain? Peter Welch is the first. Guys?
Yeah, and it's so interesting, Ashley, when they talk about they've been listening to their constituents. If you listen to the voters in the Democratic Party, Joe Biden got through those primaries with thousands of delegates. This reporting, and Ashley was, and Ali was talking about that, the Nancy Pelosi comments here on MSNBC. She said it's up to the president to decide if he's going to run. The president has said he is running. And Ashley, is this all about what happened 2 weeks ago in a 90-minute debate?
Yes and no. What happened 2 weeks ago in that debate was that what a lot of voters had been saying unprompted. Whenever I go out in the country and talk to voters, it doesn't matter what ostensible story I want to hear their opinions on, whether it's reproductive rights or the economy. Unprompted Democratic voters, loyal Democrats who voted for Biden in 2020, who would never vote for Donald Trump, brought up concerns about Biden's age unprompted. So again, in the debate, what we saw was sort of the concerns of the party, the concerns of lawmakers, the concerns of voters bursting into, well, first of all, being realized in sort of the most extreme way. Even reporters, myself included, who have covered Biden for a long time and followed him closely, that was sort of the worst and weakest we have all seen him. But it was bursting into view what had long been whispered about, and it's something he's having a real tough time recovering from because, as a number of people have said to me, you know, to say otherwise is to gaslight the American public. It's like telling them, don't believe what you saw with your own eyes. And as you know, in politics, anything that reinforces an existing narrative or existing concerns has staying power in a way that other lines of attack or other self-inflicted stumbles do not.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.